So we're making tarte aux pommes. It's a traditional classic French apple tart. Except for we're going to make it without sugar and without eggs and without added starch such as corn flour, wheat flour, or any other kind of flour. So the first thing we need to do is we need to prepare a base. I've got three kinds of bases here. This one is an all-in-one little pie tin. This one is a cake ring or pie ring on its own separate base. And this one is a push-up base. You can use any one of the three. So the one that I prefer to use is this one. In general, because you can take the ring off in case it sticks, and the base is also easy to access with a palette knife if something's sticking to it. But any one of the three are acceptable. If you make your pie in this one, you may have a problem because you might have to wait until it's cold to get it out. Whereas with the other two, it's easier to negotiate it out when it's warm. I wouldn't recommend trying to take any pie out when it's hot. So I'm going to use this one here, the separate ring and base. And the first thing that you need to do is you need to coat it on the inside with melted butter. Oil will not do. Spread of any sort will not do. What you want is butter on the inside. Brush it on, and then what we're going to do is we're going to refrigerate it so that butter hardens, and after it's been refrigerated we're going to brush it one more time. While we're waiting for that to refrigerate, we're going to talk about the pastry that we're going to use. So technically what we're going to make is not pastry. Technically what we're going to make is an almond paste. So I have here 454 grams of butter. So half of that would be 220 grams of butter, and half of that would be approximately 110 grams of butter. So we'll go with 110 grams of butter, and what we're going to do is we're going to melt that, and then we're going to incorporate in some ground almonds. So I'll do that first. Our butter, as we said, about 110 grams of butter. I'm going to blend that up. So as you can see, that forms a fairly dry paste. So we're going to put a little bit of hot water into that in a moment. Now, in addition to almonds and butter and water, I'm going to put 20 grams of whey protein. So because we're not using any eggs, because we're not using any sugar, there are very few elements in there that are going to help everything to stick together. And we certainly do need it to stick together. So here's our hot water. Put that in. We'll put in 125 ml of hot water. Scrape the blender down once. That whey protein is protein powder, and it also contains some artificial sweetener and vanilla. So you don't need to add in extra sweetener. We'll give it one more blitz. I'll scrape it down one more time. Just give it a last little blitz, and that'll do. So now we're ready. We don't need to wait for this to cool. We can straight away go ahead and line our base with this. Okay, so we have our base out from the fridge. So we're going to give it one more little coating of butter to make it to ensure that our paste doesn't stick too much to the inside of it. Normally with pastry you've got eggs to bind everything together, so in our case we don't have eggs to bind everything together. We have a little bit of protein powder in there, a little bit of whey protein to act as a glue. So I am going to roll this pastry, and then I'm going to use a pizza peel to put it on top over my base. So you don't have to do that. You can use a spoon and your fingers to pat it into place where it needs to be, and there's nothing in the world wrong with doing that. It's absolutely fine. Depending on what kind of pie I'm doing, and depending on what the dietary requirements are for that pie and how the actual paste is, I might use a spoon to put it in and my fingers, or I might roll it out. So in this case, I'm going to try rolling it out and see how it works. You can see all that butter sticking to the rolling pin there. And if you have a diet that means that you can't eat carbs or glucose, then you'll have a tough life if you also eliminate butter from your life. So remember, this recipe has no eggs, no sugar, no added starch, so it leaves you with limited amount of ingredients. So enjoy the ones that you've got left. So I'm going to, don't worry too much. It's going to happen. It's not the end of the world. We got our base under there. It's going to break, and that's okay. Yeah, here we go. Oh dear, that's okay. Get it in as best you can. It's a little bit thicker, but it's going to thin out by the time you have it pressed into shape. The rolling it out just reduces your time a little bit from using your hands. When you're making a normal short crust pastry or pâté à sucre, when you become accustomed to working it, it's much easier to work than what we're doing here. But remember, we're doing this to fulfill some fairly specific dietary requirements. So everything doesn't work in the traditional old way. So if you have your pastry chef hat on, or your baker's hat on, or whatever hat it is you think you normally put on when you're doing your expert cookery, you'd be tempted to criticize that it's not all neat and tidy and organized. But the area of low carb patisserie, certainly domestic at home low carb patisserie, is relatively unexplored. So we're kind of breaking new ground with these. At least I'm breaking new ground. Okay, so you trim off the top, and it's beginning to look a little bit more neat and tidy. Now that's exactly what we want for now. So what we're going to do is we're just going to pop that in the fridge to let it set a little bit. Okay, so this is the pastry that's left over. We'll call it almond pastry. I'm going to pop it in the blender here, and I'm going to show you what we're going to do with that in a minute. We're going to use that to make a pastry cream, a crème pâtissière or baker's custard, to put in between our stewed apples and our fanned decorative apples on top of the tart aux pommes. I've got 5 apples here. You can use normal Bramley cooking apples if you like, in which case you might need a little bit of extra sweetener. I am using these nice red apples, which were a gift from the granny in Lithuania, and we're going to need a little bit of lemon juice to keep everything nice and bright and clean. So don't forget, always keep your lemons after you've squeezed the juice out. Keep the end part, and in one of my future videos I'm going to show you one of the several uses you can use them for. That's almost enough for that one, and I'm going to put another half lemon in here. I have a little bit of cinnamon, pinch of cinnamon in the bottom of that pot already. So we're going to divide our apples into 2 different kinds. So first of all, I'm going to show you for our stewed apples. So for our stewed apples, you're going to peel off the apple. Use any peeler you like. Use a turning knife if that's what you prefer to do. but it's fairly important to get the consistent size of the apples once they're cut up, as in not too random with the apples. Okay, so I'm just going to show you one apple. Okay, so down the middle, and then take out the inside core like that. Take out the inside core like that. So out of the 5 apples that I've got here, we're going to do 3 of the apples like this. So once you got the core out, you can cut it down the middle like that. Take out those little black bits. There we go. And then about this thickness. So roughly that size is what we want. And if we do that, then everything will be the same. Nothing, part of it will be slightly overcooked and stewy, which is what we want. And part of it will still be intact, which is exactly what we want. Okay, I'll come back and show you the fanned apples in a moment. So for your fanned apples, you need 4 half apples. So choose the apples that look fairly nice. Cut down the middle. Okay, and then you can see, carefully cut out that kind of core piece. If you have an apple corer, you can core the apple down the center and then cut it in half if you want. That's okay. This way works just fine for me. This is the way I've been doing it all my life, and I get on fine without an apple corer. But if you have an apple corer, good for you. That's fine. So just cut out the center piece like that. That little bit can be a little bit chewy, can be a little bit unpleasant in your mouth, so take that out. Okay. Then get a good sharp knife and you cut off the front piece like that. We don't need that piece, okay? And then you can cut the rest into somewhere between 1 and 2 millimeter slices. So just the power's gone off there. So let's continue with our 4 halves. And why we need this so neat is this is the pretty part that sits on top of the tarte aux pommes. So the back and the front, we're going to pop that into the stewed apple in a moment. And the part that we've just cut nice and neat, we'll put that into the lemon juice there to keep it nice and bright. Take your time doing this. Try not to be disturbed like I was. About 1.5 millimeters thick. A little bit thicker is okay, a little bit thinner is okay, but your pie will look much better if they are all the same thickness. Put that in there. Cut the top off again. Don't want the top or the bottom. So just to show you what to do with those end bits. If you want, well, I would normally peel them off roughly. You don't have to be 100% accurate. It's okay to have a little bit of an apple peel inside. That's all right. We're not in for an inspection. This is just for our own home consumption here. Just like that. Okay. A little bit more off there. And that's how you do that one, so you can finish the rest of them. So you can put as much or as little sweetener as you want. So I'm going to put about 3 teaspoons in there. And you can put as much or as little cinnamon as you want. So in the pot we have our apples, our cinnamon, our sweetener and the lemon juice. So I'm going to stew that for a few minutes and then I'll bring you back and show you. While we're waiting for our apples to stew up, I'm going to show you the crème pâtissier. So that's our leftover almond pastry in there. So remember that contains almonds, a little bit of protein powder and some butter. So we're going to take some hot milk on your blender and then pour it in gently. Now we give it a good run there to make sure it's nice and smooth. $20 grams more protein powder. Now we've mixed that nicely, and I do think that will bake and set just nice, but I'm going to heat it through a little bit more just to make sure that the consistency is correct. Now for your information, what I'm doing is I'm removing the blade from the blender, and then I'm popping the blender whole into the microwave because there's no metal pieces in it. That saves you transferring it in and out of a saucepan and so. So that thickness there, that's what we're looking for. And I'm just going to taste it. That tastes nice and vanilla. It's sweet enough. You don't need to add anything extra in there. We're going to put that on top of our layer of stewed apples. And in the process of it cooking in the oven, it should set. We don't want it set like a brick. We want it set so that it resembles a creme patissier, like a custard or pastry cream. And as it is now, the consistency is exactly how I want it, and the flavour is actually really, really nice. The flavour, this one comes from Lidl. Vanilla whey protein powder comes from Lidl, and it is 3.5% carb, so it's fairly acceptable for anybody on a low carb diet. Okay, so this is a good time for you to turn on your oven. Preheat it to 200 degrees. Put a shelf low in the oven or directly on the bottom of the oven, and if you have a pizza stone, put it there as well. So now we're going to assemble our pie. This is nice and cold already and set. So don't take this out of the refrigerator until you have everything ready to go. So everything ready to go, your creme patissier, your apples which are fanned and ready to use, and your stewed apple and your base, okay? Because once you start at this point, there's no stopping really. You shouldn't stop. It should go from here directly into the oven. So you can see the stewed apple is nice. About half or thereabouts, 1/3 of the apple is melted, has melted down into a puree. And you're still left with some chunks. So that's your basic stewed apple. And that's exactly how we want it to look. Okay. So you pop that into your base. And you can level it around with a spatula. Okay, and then your creme patissier goes in. So clean off your blade nicely. We might pop the blade back in a minute. No, we don't need to. Okay, that's your creme patissier. Or a baker's custard, or in our case we can call it an almond custard. It's somewhere in between a custard and a frangipan. We don't need to argue about technicality. Now plop it in such a way that you can spread it out nice and flat and nice. So when you got that in, you can give it a little tap down just to get it into all the cracks. Now is the time for your apple. Now you can overlap a little bit outside your ring. You can see that? Because what's going to happen is they're going to shrink back a little bit. And this is an exercise that you want to do when you have a fairly good idea that you're not going to be disturbed. You're not going to have to go off from this for a half an hour and come back. This is the kind of thing you want to try and do at a time where you can go right from start to finish. So there's 1/4. You might have a little bit too much apple. You made a nice fancy apple pie. So take your time when you're cutting it. Now you can fill in the little hole in the middle there if you want. I'll see if I can do some 1/4 segments to just make it a little bit neater inside there. You can be as detailed and fiddly or as homemade and basic as you want. It's up to you. It's your pie. You're going to eat it. So I think that's kind of good enough there for me. You put a cherry in the middle after you've cooked it if you want. So that's it. So you're going to put it into a hot oven. You're preheating to 200. You can even preheat to 210. You're going to put it in the bottom of the oven because that almond has a lot of cooking to do through your base. You've got a big thick pie there and it all kind of needs to be cooked. So you're going to start it at 200. You're going to leave it at 200 for about 15 minutes. And then you're going to turn it down to 150 for 45 minutes. Keep your eye on the top to make sure that it's not too brown. You don't want it burned. I'll show you when it comes out. That's it, in the bottom on a pizza stone. So this is our pie out from the oven. So I'm going to give it a glaze, and I'm going to use this one, 0 calories maple syrup. So sugar-free, vegan, fat-free, and the carb content of this is 0.8 of a gram per 100 ml. So there's next to nothing. Fairly generous with this. My only caveat that I would give is that, in my opinion, it tastes a little bit artificial. So just use what you need to give it a shine. And in addition to giving it a shine, it kind of glues those apples together on top. And that allows you to cut it a bit more handy, a little bit more easily, because it's very difficult to cut tart aux pommes without messing up all your nice arrangement of apples on top. So that's it really. I will not take it out of the ring right now, but you know, if you made it in a pie dish, you can take it out of the pie dish, but you have to wait till it gets cold. Wait till it gets cold, and you can put a board on top of it and then flip it over, and then put a plate and then flip it back. But for me, what I'll do is when it gets cold, I'll use a fairly slim knife like this one here, and I'll run the slim knife really close around the edge and then gently slide off the ring, and that usually works quite well for me. There you go.